Hello there and welcome back to Sultan Sanctuary. Today we're going to head into the Sunken Keep and eventually fight two bosses, oh boy. You also get to see me get nearly wrecked by both of them. Nearly because I don't quite die, but I come very close to it. These ones are toughies. But before we do any of that, we're going to have to make preparations to quit the life of magery, at least for now. Stripping ourselves of our staff and wand and giving ourselves new armor. Naturally, we're not just going to do things barehanded, so we need new weapons, and that is what the alchemist is going to assist us with. As I briefly showed off last time, you can transmute weapons into other, usually stronger weapons using certain items. This is actually how you access the majority of the weapons in most weapon classes in the game. Some weapon classes are particularly extreme in this regard, for example great hammers, only one of which you can actually find out in the game world, all the rest you have to transmute from that one that you find. Here we have armed ourselves with a trident and a battle axe, both excellent examples of their class of weapon at this point. The trident in particular is really strong, even without investing much in dexterity with which it scales. Of course, to wield that axe, we'll need to get class 1 axes and hammers, and thankfully we had one black pearl left to do that. It's almost like I planned this out. That actually was just a fortuitous coincidence. So yeah, let's get that stuff equipped. Axes are best used one-handed in my opinion, not to mention it's also always good to be able to have the ability to block. Especially since we're wearing heavy armor, rolling isn't always the best option. The trident, meanwhile, will be two-handing since the two-handed spear moveset is far superior to the one-handed. It's stronger and has more special combos available to it. The only reason to go one-handed is if you wanted to go with like a shield or something else in your offhand. As for our charms, we're using the Mossy Charm to increase the attack speed of both weapons. Their reach is plenty enough, so we don't need to use the Pale Charm. Now, to make sure that our weapons are as strong as possible, we're going to want to upgrade them. So let's head back to our first sanctuary of Devourer's Light that we've forsook, and have become an apostate too. Naturally, we can't just rejoin. Some crimes cannot be so easily forgiven. Thankfully, most of the merchants are perfectly fine to still do business with us. Unfortunately, the blacksmith is not one of them. So if we're going to want to upgrade our weapons, we're going to have to go somewhere else, somewhere where we're not hated. Before we do though, we are going to pick up the Arcane Weapon Incantation buff. Very useful if you're using weapons, as it is a pretty significant damage boost, even without much magic investment. And as an incantation, of course, it can be equipped like an item, so it does not need to be used with a wand or a stave, which is useful for us. So let's make use of the guide that we so wisely thought to put here in advance, and travel back to the sanctuary that's been claimed by the three, since they don't hate us. And the blacksmith, unlike the alchemist, is happy to do business with us even if we're not part of his creed. So let's get our weapons upgraded. I would say, if not for the fact that we lack materials, we would only be able to upgrade one of them once, and that's just not going to do. So let's make a little side journey back to that one merchant who offered upgrade materials, as well as some boss armor sets. Now, normally I would cut something like this out, but I wanted to show it off here, A, because it's not that long, and I'm lazy, and B, because this is a journey you're likely to make a fair amount early on in the game, unless you just stock up on that basic upgrade item. So not showing it would be remiss in that regard, I would say. Fortunately, all of the enemies along the way are even easier to deal with than they were before, now that we're stronger, although the dogs, as always, are fairly annoying thanks to their grab. Enemies with grabs are always the worst in these sorts of games. I didn't bother to do this because I didn't really feel like it, but if you are just making a quick journey to someplace else like this, you can try and de-equip all your things so that way you reach the lowest equip load tier and move as fast as possible. If you combine that with the super jump exploit, you can really get around much more quickly than you otherwise could. So this merchant here is now offering the Queen of Smiles armor set, and if you're at all interested in the lore, you might want to pause it here and read each of these items' descriptions. They actually each say a unique thing about the Queen of Smiles, Lanaya. The gist of it is that she's basically fantasy Marie Antoinette. That's the quickest way that I can sum it up. But of course, the primary reason that we came here was for more locks of hair, so let's purchase a whole bunch. It's actually not that bad of an idea to overstock on them just in case you want to upgrade something else later. As long as you have the gold to spare, of course. I want to conserve my gold a little bit, just for more item purchases in the future. And there was our first use of the bell, which returns you to the last sanctuary that you rested at. Generally speaking, I don't use those, as I'd rather just use the horns to travel between the guide networks. That's usually what I want to do fast travel for, but that is one of the rare situations where I do actually use the bell. Alright, now we've upgraded both of our weapons to +2. It's not a huge damage boost, but every little bit helps. Now, strictly speaking, we have finished our preparations that are needed to be done before we head into the Sunken Keep, but there is one other thing we can do before making more progress, and that's to remove the sin that we've accumulated. Leaving a creed not only makes them pissed off at you, but it also gives you a point of sin, and that's something we'd rather not have. So let's go return to that candlelit lady that we found way at the bottom after the Queen of Smiles boss room. Fortunately, it's not an especially long trip. To be honest, I'm only showing this off because I want to show off everything I can in the game. Having sin isn't really all that big of a deal. All it does is have the creed that you abandon pissed off, and that only amounts to some of the shopkeepers refusing to do business with you. But we might as well do it now since the NPC that cures sin is so close by. The cost is pretty paltry as well, only a meager 1,000 salt for each sin that you've accrued. It's 1 sin per creed abandoned. Of course, that's not the only way to gain sin in this game, and other methods of gaining sin are considerably more costly to remove. But we won't be seeing that for a long time, near the end of the game in fact. So, with every last preparation out of the way, including purchasing a few more calling horns, since we've nearly run out, let's actually, finally, 8 minutes in, make some progress here, and venture into the Sunken Keep. I probably said that a bit too dramatically. Not really appropriate of the fanfare that we're receiving upon entering, but hey. You're gonna want to use a torch here because you want to be able to see these enemies that spawn here. They are right bastards. I take them out quickly here, but suffice it to say, if you leave them alive, they're going to wreck you. They're called Wretch Feeders, and they have a grab that always does 50% of your HP. Regardless of how much HP you have. It's kind of ridiculous. So, coming here, we finally see the other side of the elevator that we spied last time from the Watching Woods. Now that we've activated it, we can actually use it to travel both up and down here. Remember before how I mentioned you could drop into this area and actually survive as long as you had full HP? That's the reason why the Mad Alchemist is technically optional. You can enter into the Sunken Keep via this way and then come around the long way, but I don't recommend it because there's a boss right here. And he's a fairly tough one. It helps to have the extra levels and gear and whatnot that you've purchased with salt that you've gotten from the Mad Alchemist before fighting the Kraken Cyclops. So, for the first, 70% of the fight, I just utterly wrecked this guy thanks to my absurd damage output, thanks to both the Trident and the Arcane Weapon buff. Seriously, the Trident is super good early on, second only to the Shrouded Bulwark that I mentioned last time, that you can make from the Claymore and the Sodden Knight's Ashes. At this point I switch over to the Axe and Shield to show just how easily he's cheesed with the shield. since you can just block everything so long as you're decent with your block timings and regenerating stamina in between attacks. But then things start to go a little bit more poorly for me. Right here. Here's where I first get hit and then just completely lose my rhythm for a good while and just keep getting hit over and over. And unfortunately, the red grass is a really poor healing item if you're not able to effectively avoid damage, thanks to how slowly it actually regenerates your HP. This is made all the worse, of course, by how aggressive the Kraken Cyclops gets when you get him down to less than half of his full HP. A lot of his attacks end up having follow-ups that can reach behind him, and are very tricky to dodge accurately if you don't have the very best roll. And we have the second worst, so that's why I'm failing a lot of these dodge attempts. Fortunately, I do make them where they count. I would have liked the finish of this fight to have been a bit more dramatic and cool looking, but not dying is the most important thing, so I'll take it regardless. It's worth noting that if you do come into the Sunken Fortress by the door that's opened with the Mad Alchemist's key, you could just ignore this guy entirely, just head right from that initial entry point rather than left and down as we did, and you never actually have to fight him. He is worth fighting at some point because he gives a lot of salt and gold, but maybe do that after you've explored the rest of the Sunken Keep first and gotten a little bit stronger. I'm doing it in this order because that's just how I'm used to doing it, and it's a more efficient way of exploring this area. We have more wretch feeders to deal with on the way, unfortunately, and a new enemy type, one that is a right pain in the ass. A big enough pain in the ass that I'm actually going to be careful here and draw out the wretch feeders, so that way I don't aggro the eyeball at the same time. Because the eyeball is really dangerous when accompanied by other enemies. It has no attacks on its own, but it strongly buffs other enemies, as you'll be seeing in a second when we encounter a second one, with enemies who I can't kill before it gets to them. Fortunately, killing the enemy itself isn't all that big of a deal, since I do have pretty good air combat ability thanks to the axe. If I was stuck using the spear, that would not be the case. They're not good weapons for attacking enemies in the air. So as you can see, it actually surrounds multiple enemies with this protective bubble, and this makes those enemies completely invincible to all forms of damage. I can't even stagger them with attacks. This results in even the most weakest of fodder becoming incredibly deadly, as long as that Heart Seeker is alive. That's what the enemy is called, by the way. Fortunately, we won't be seeing that enemy type for quite some time. They're basically an early appearance of a much later game enemy. So here we come to the Red Hall of Cages, which is one of my favorite areas in the game. Unfortunately, we can't actually explore it now. This is basically just a sneak preview with a little bit of treasure to reward us for coming all this way, and it is a very good reward. That is the first stone mage that you can acquire that is not locked behind a secret area, and thus the first one you're likely to come across on your first playthrough. As I've explained before, starting as a mage can be a right pain in this game, what with how secretly magic is hoarded, at least early on. But our brief foray into the Red Hall of Cages concluded, let's get back to exploring the rest of the Sunken Keep. And unfortunately that means dealing with a ton more wretch feeders. Yeah, here you can see just how deadly their grab was, doing 50% of your maximum HP regardless of where your current HP is. Can very easily one-shot you if you've taken a lot of wounding damage and are low on HP. Might not be a bad idea, in fact, to pack a healing miracle for this area then, if you're so statistically inclined. That way you can recover that wounding effect. Or you can just kill the wretch feeders before they have a chance to grab you. They're quite weak, so as long as you can get off a few attacks right as they spawn, they're not going to be too much of a threat. So this ends up leading back to that one fork that we went left to go fight the Kraken Cyclops. So at this point we've seen a decent amount of both the axe and the spear, so let's actually discuss them a little bit. Axes slash hammers, they have the exact same moveset and function pretty much identically, just dealing different damage types in general. Axes usually dealing slash, and hammers usually dealing bludgeoning, although there are a few exceptions to that. I'm not a huge fan of this weapon class. I pretty much just consider it a worse version of these swords. They do more damage and cause enemies to stagger more quickly, but they also swing more slowly and they have less useful combo moves available to them. They're not bad by any means, but I just consider them to be purely inferior to the swords and thus not really worth using. Spears, on the other hand, do actually have something over halberds, who I would otherwise consider a superior weapon class, since halberds tend to do a bit more damage. For the most part, spears and halberds have the exact same moveset. The one exception is their strong attack. Halberds have a slashing attack, while spears have a jumping poke. For most situations, the halberd's slashing attack is more useful as it can hit a bit higher vertically than the spear's poke. However, the spear's poke actually does 2 hits, and if you hit an enemy with both of those, you're going to deal a lot of damage, and for not all that high stamina cost. And that's where these spears truly shine. So yeah, that's my thought on spears and axes slash hammers. Here we've claimed our first sanctuary for our new creed, the Woodswraiths. I considered offering some sort of stone idol, but thought better of it. This is not a sanctuary we're likely to return to, so the only real benefit would be getting whatever bonus the stone idol grants to that region, and we're not really hurting for special effects to aid us. So that ring that we picked up, I'll be explaining it later. It is a mage-related ring, and it actually concerns a mechanic that appeared last time when we used magic, but I never got a chance to discuss. I'll get more chances in the future when we return to using proper wand and stave magic. For now, let's just keep things from getting a bit too complicated and continue exploring the Sunken Keep. This uppermost section here has the return of the Vile Hawks, and they're just as annoying as always, if not more so, paired with the Wretch Feeders here. It actually leads to a pretty hairy situation here, mostly due to my mishandling of the combat. You'll actually notice that I suffer from a few control mishaps here, and that's because I've been recently playing Neo, which has a somewhat similar control scheme, including having light and heavy attacks be bound to the same buttons, but has enough key button differences that it's really screwing me over. Notably, I end up often changing my loadout when I mean to guard, because the guard button in Neo changes loadout in this game. That's basically just my excuse I'm offering as to why I do a little bit poorly here, and against the later boss that we'll be fighting. That aside, something I do want to point out that I did not do at the time, but an item that we picked up earlier was the Warhammer. That is one of the most significant items in this area because it is the only great hammer that you can actually acquire in the game world. All of the rest you acquire by transmuting that Warhammer into other more powerful great hammers. So if you're interested in using that weapon class, be sure to pick that up. Thankfully, it's so close to the topside entrance that it's not really all that difficult to acquire. Heading down this way, we acquire a few more interesting items, such as this crystal sphere hidden cleverly behind that tree in the foreground. You may remember that the crystal sphere was one of the items that we could have chosen as our starting effect. We'll see what the crystal sphere does in the future. Suffice it to say, it is an incredibly useful item and one that you want to use sparingly, since there's only a few available in the entire game. So the other items that we picked up here were the plated band, which gives you a small boost to strength, not all that useful in my opinion. Even if you're using strength scaling weapons, you have better ring options. The other item we picked up, however, is incredibly useful. It is a class 1 prayer, and the primary reason that any build should consider investing in class 1 prayers, and that is because it surrounds us with light, without needing to use up a hand like the torch. Now that light is a bit less intense, but not to the extent that it's not worth using. In fact, in dark areas it is very much worth using because it leaves that other hand free, and thus does not screw up potential loadouts, such as if you can only two-hand one of the weapons you're equipping, or if you're relying on a shield or a gun in the offhand. The Sunken Keep is pretty much useful item central, so many good things for so many different builds. Absolutely worth exploring to its fullest. But we've done about all the exploring that we can at this point, so it's just time to continue to progress. And not just progress, but finish the area. We are very close to the boss room, in fact. We're in the same vicinity as the boss room. But we're not going to enter it just yet. Because we took the extra effort of beating the Kraken Cyclops prior to this upcoming boss, we're actually given a little bit of advantage versus it. For my money, this upcoming boss is actually probably the toughest of the early game boss encounters, and I'm thinking that the developers thought so as well. And that's why they give you the extra handy aid of giving you one of these shrines right before the boss, but only if you go through the effort of taking out the Kraken Cyclops beforehand, otherwise it is sealed off. Although, amusingly enough, approaching a boss from the back entrance can kind of screw up its intro sequence. The boss is normally supposed to remain still when it does this little title introduction, but approaching him so quickly caused his AI to react before the fight actually began properly. If I had entered into the room more quickly, such as with the super jump, he actually would have started and possibly hit me with an attack before that intro occurred. It's just a little bit glitchy, that. So yeah, this here is the false Jester. If you recall, the Wandering Swordsman actually told us of a Jester who knows how to get to places that no one else does. This is not that Jester, however, as his title of false would suggest. This Jester is just here to murder you, rather than help you. And he nearly does a very good job of that here, getting quite a few hits in early on, which is all the more troublesome considering how slow the healing effect of the red grass is. The false Jester is not quite as damaging as the Kraken Cyclops, but he is pretty damn close. Despite being much smaller, he has perhaps even more reach thanks to his attacks being things like running or jumping slashes. The real issue is that the false Jester is considerably more aggressive than pretty much any of the previous bosses, and that's right out from the get-go. When you get him below half, he gets even more aggressive. It's to the point that even though you can completely negate his damage with the Toothless Shield, it can be difficult to find the actual opportunities to attack without being counterattacked in return. And we can't really rely on rolling all that much due to our poor roll speed. A downside of the heavy armor, although there's a chance that we would have died if we had had lesser armor with less defense equipped. So it's a bit of a wash. Now, although that Jester was not humorous at all, one amusing thing about him is that if you do defeat the Kraken Cyclops, you don't have to fight the false Jester at all, since the real Jester is right here. You can just ignore the false one entirely. The real Jester, thankfully, is considerably more friendly than the false one. Greetings, friend, you've come to chatter. From where I sit, you seem the matter. Fork, spoon, knife, and a drowned man's wife. Where I come from, in is out, down is up, and up is down. Plate, cup, bowl, and a broken widow's soul. Would you like this rich perspective? Trust me, lord, it's quite authentic. Elbow, jaw, knee, and a grave beneath the sea. Sure. Fear not then, extend your hand. There is great power in a brand, white searing hot, and an iron-forged thought. So here we come to probably one of the core mechanics of the game. Ability upgrades in the form of brands on our skin. Seek and find the hollowed stones. What comes next I trust you'll know. Fate, faith, fade, and the calm beneath the shade. And that's all he has to say. Despite their appearance as amusing rhymes, his words actually do contain important meaning. For he informs us that now with that brand we can finally interact with those obelisks and give ourselves a new perspective on life. But I'm afraid that we'll have to save that for next time as we're running out of time, so see you next time, friends.